Hey guys, we're going to talk about sleep regulation in this lecture, mostly sleep loss and debt. I'm going to talk mostly about the experiments on sleep loss that we have done in the past. And so I'm going to just kind of very quickly go through the very beginning of this lecture just to kind of talk about terms. But most of the focus is going to be on the actual experiments that have been done on sleep loss. And that is the world record. So when it comes to terms, we have both sleep debt and sleep restriction as important terms for you guys to know about. Sleep debt is, think of it like the debt that you accrue if you don't pay when you borrow money, for example. So if you have a credit card and you've borrowed money, you're now in debt. If you spend $100 on something, you now owe $100. So the idea on sleep debt is that whenever you lose sleep, you have to pay it back. And so you can think of it as losing sleep on a daily basis. So let's say you just don't get enough of sleep from day to day. Then you accrue that over the course of the week, and then it just builds and builds and builds. Now, depending on who you ask, some scientists say that you must actually pay this back hour by hour. There are other scientists who say that that's impossible. But the idea is that in order to get back to zero, that you have to pay that sleep debt back, at some point. So if you lose an hour of sleep each day for one full week, that's 7 hours of sleep that you've lost. So it's an hour per day. So you need to actually make up 7 hours of sleep at some point after that, just to get yourself back to zero. So sleep debt is this idea that, you accumulate sleep over time. Sleep restriction and sleep deprivation are very similar, but they are actually two separate things. So sleep restriction is what we refer to as when we're doing an experiment and we have somebody come in, we're restricting the amount of sleep that they're getting. You can say that you restrict sleep to only so many hours. So the person is restricted to 7 hours regardless, or they're restricted to 5 hours regardless of how much sleep they get. Or you can actually restrict a person's sleep of 2 hours. So regardless of how much sleep they normally get, let's say they normally get 9 hours of sleep per night, and you restrict them 2 hours, that means they're going to get 7 hours of sleep per night. Another person might come in and they sleep 7 hours per night, but you restrict their sleep minus 2 hours, then they'll only sleep 5 hours that night. Usually these sleep restriction studies are done sort of not super excessive. It's not a super severe restriction. You're only talking about an hour or two. You're not talking about restricting their sleep to the point where they're only sleeping an hour a night. That's usually referred to as sleep deprivation. You're actually depriving them of sleep. A lot of times when we do sleep restriction, it's actually where a person is sleeping excessively. So they may be sleeping 12 hours per night, and you want to get them back to a normal level. So you may restrict them down to seven hours per night, because we've found that there may be some health benefits for some people who sleep excessively to cut them down, and that actually helps them out. So sleep deprivation refers to insufficient sleep. So this is where a person goes without any sleep or very little sleep. And then, of course, that leads to accumulated debt. A lot of the studies that have been done in the past have been some very, very serious, severe sleep deprivation, talking about 24-hour, 48-hour deprivation. And we typically find that military organizations, for example, the DoD, Department of Defense, and different government institutions like military institutions like to fund sleep deprivation experiments, mostly because they like to know what is the minimum amount of sleep that you need in order to perform normally or at your best. Because that can be translated to missions in field. And if you're going without sleep because of the conditions or going without sleep because of a mission, how can you perform better in that particular instance? So like I said, some experts do believe that lost sleep must be paid back hour for hour. And this is an example here. I already gave you an example previously. And the idea is that if you make up your sleep debt, even if it occurs sort of incrementally throughout the week, that you'll actually still probably be tired if you don't fully repay that debt. And it gets to the point where it becomes impossible. There's just not enough hours in the day to make that sleep up. But the idea is that experiments do say, some experts do say that you should actually pay it back hour per hour, hour for hour. Now, when it comes to sleep latency, okay, so sleep latency is the amount of time that it takes to go from full wakefulness to sleep. So it's how long does it take you to fall asleep? So you might hear me talk about sleep latency all throughout the semester, and I'm always referring to how long does it take you to fall asleep. And of course, sleep debt is related to sleep latency. The more debt you've accrued, the tireder you are, and the faster you're going to fall asleep. So think about it this way: you haven't gotten sleep all week due to maybe it's finals week, and you've only gotten 4 or 5 hours each night. Well, when you get a chance to lay your head down, you're going to pass out really quickly. William Dement or Bill Dement did a really, really cool study several decades ago, which we refer to as the mattress study. So he was slated to test this very expensive mattress, something that many people probably wouldn't have been able to afford. But he was asked to test it and basically show that, okay, if you fall asleep quicker on this mattress, then the company would be able to sell it better, simply because they could make the argument that, oh, hey, an experimental study has been done and shown that you fall asleep, an hour faster on this mattress. And so when Dement did the experiment, he didn't realize until much later about what exactly happened and how he actually sort of set the experiment up for failure. So he took college students, which is typically the population that you're going to target because they're easy to get your hands on. He had groups of college students sleep. He had one group sleep on the mattress that he was given, and he had another group sleep on a concrete floor with just a blanket. And so the idea was that he was thinking, well, this is a very, very big difference. People that are sleeping on concrete floors could very likely probably take them a lot longer to fall asleep because they're uncomfortable, as compared to this really, really super nice, expensive mattress. And it turns out that there was no difference between the groups. The group that ended up falling asleep on the concrete floor fell asleep just as quickly as the group that who fell asleep on the mattress. And so for years, he was kind of boggled by this, and he was very disappointed to tell the mattress people that, hey, your mattress isn't good enough that it's going to make you fall asleep faster. It turns out that he realized that it was the population that was the problem. So it was college students. And because college students are very notoriously sleep deprived and have accrued such a large sleep debt, that most people can fall asleep. Many college students, and even have admitted in my class, that they can fall asleep pretty much anywhere. You just kind of, you're so tired that you can fall asleep in class, you can fall asleep sitting up, you can fall asleep standing up. It doesn't matter if you're sitting on concrete or you're sitting on a nice mattress, you're going to pass out really quickly. So after sort of realizing this, Dement realized that he probably should have looked at different populations. So he probably should have looked at maybe middle-aged women or older adults, or adults who typically have a longer latency and perhaps don't have the sleep debt accrued like a college student would. So, how much sleep debt you have accrued is going to reflect how long it takes you to fall asleep. And typically, if you're sleep deprived, you're going to fall asleep pretty quickly. And the test that's been created to test sleep latency is the multiple sleep latency test, or the MSLT. And this is a really interesting test. So in essence, it measures your sleep latency, how quickly you fall asleep. You're sitting in, you're lying on a bed, and you have, you're hooked up to polysomnography, so they know exactly when you fall asleep. And so you're given 5 opportunities. So this is like sort of 5 trials. And so all arousal sources are removed, sounds and different things that could keep you awake, all that's removed. And you're just told, okay, fall asleep. And this happens, over the course of the day. And so as you attempt to fall asleep, you're given 20 minutes. So you're given a score of 0 to 20. And however long it takes you, maybe it takes you 10 minutes, then you're immediately woken because they don't want you to gain any, um, they don't want you to recover your sleep at all. So if you fall asleep at 10 minutes, they're going to immediately wake you up, and then you'll do another trial of the test. If it takes you more than 20 minutes, then they're just going to say, okay, your score is 20 and you're up. And then every 2 hours these trials are done. And then so what's been found is essentially that if it takes you more than about 10 minutes to fall asleep, that's about the average, about 10 minutes in a person who is not sleep deprived, who's someone who is, kind of a healthy, normal sleeper. If you're falling asleep in less than 5 minutes over the course of the MSLT, then that's considered pathologically sleepy. You have pathological daytime sleepiness, as in you're so tired that you can be sitting there, and if you're still for 5 minutes, you're going to fall asleep. And it measures sleepiness and sleep need. And so because they wake you immediately after a trial, then you're not going to affect the other trials because you haven't had a chance to make up that sleep. You've just had a chance to doze off before they wake you up. So it's a really good indicator of sleep need. And so when we look at some of these different indicators of, okay, how do you know if you are experiencing insufficient sleep? So if you need an alarm clock to wake up, person who has very consistent sleep patterns, who has a very good circadian rhythm, and who is not sleep deprived is going to wake up about the same time every single day, regardless if they have an alarm clock or not. If you feel really sleepy and drowsy while driving, if you feel like you're addicted to caffeine or any other stimulants and you need them, if you make a lot of mistakes, forget a lot, if you feel kind of low in terms of depressed, or your mood is depressed, mood and sleep is very, very tightly interrelated. Also getting sick really frequently, because we know that when you are not getting enough sleep, it affects your immune system, and it makes it so that you're going to get sick easier. And you're more likely to experience sleep, which is why a lot of us tend to kind of crash around the breaks, around fall break, spring break. We tend to crash because we're not getting as much sleep and our immune system is down. So when we look at somebody who's partially sleep deprived, who's not getting it, who's getting insufficient sleep, of course you fall asleep faster. But during the time you are asleep, you're actually sleeping more efficiently. You're sleeping deeper. It's harder to wake you because your body is trying to make up for the sleep that is getting. Your mood tends to be affected, as well as your mental skills, and you tend to lose out on that REM sleep because you're trying to make up in slow wave sleep. Now, one thing I just kind of want to mention is that in some of the deprivation studies, the idea is that they want to deprive you of only particular stages of sleep or types of sleep. So some of this can be done and some of it can't be done, or at least we don't know a way of it. We can't deprive somebody of stages 1 and 2 simply because that's a transition stage, and you can't get to the next stages without stages 1 and 2 unless you're already severely deprived, but that's sort of its own separate thing. It's not, you can't control it. So we don't really know what happens if you lose stage 1 and stage 2 because we don't really have a way to test it. And the reason why I have this is it's impossible to do. Ha ha ha. Okay, so slow wave sleep, you can deprive somebody of by essentially, once they go through stage 1 and stage 2, what you do is you sound a tone that's loud enough to get them out of slow wave, but not loud enough to wake them. And so this noise is going to not pull them completely out of sleep, but it's only going to pull them out of those delta waves. And one thing that we notice is when we and we're still letting them get to REM sleep, but anytime they start acting like they're going to go into slow wave sleep, we sound this tone and pull them out, and that tone can be different for each person. And it's just one of those things where you have to test it, and then you have to get the right tone there, so it's not too loud as to actually wake them completely. So one thing that people tend to report is when they don't get enough slow wave sleep, they actually become very lethargic and their muscles ache. Also, when you deprive people of sleep, what ends up happening is this pressure increases. So they're wanting to get into slow wave sleep faster. And so we see that when the person is allowed to go back to sleep, they try to go into slow wave sleep very quickly, and then they're kind of pulled out of it. So the attempts to get into slow wave sleep increase, and it alters their architecture throughout their night, the sleep architecture. We also see that when they are allowed to make up their sleep, we see this increase in density of the waves. We also see that increase of that of the slow wave sleep time. They're in slow wave sleep longer when they're given a recovery period. And then we also see an increase in REM as well on their recovery after that initial night, because if they're spending more time in slow wave sleep that first recovery night, that means they're spending less time in REM. So they almost become deprived of REM. So nights 2 and 3, they have to make that up. If you do the same sort of thing with REM that you do with slow wave sleep, so as soon as a person starts going into REM, you pull them out of it, but let them continue with slow wave sleep in stages 1 and 2. What we see is that, again, this pressure builds up. And we see that people will tend to try to get into REM faster when they're able to fall back asleep. So when we measure this by how many times we have to wake them out of REM. So here you see the first night, they have attempted 17 times to get into REM sleep. By the 4th night, they've attempted it 42 times. And by the 7th night, so after a week, they're attempting to go into sleep 68 times. So that pressure of need of REM, it starts building over the course if they're being deprived. We also see that REM deprivation has been used in things like depression. And we see it as a very temporary solution. It's something, and scientists have actually done full night deprivation, which is complete sleep deprivation, to try to get people back to sort of a baseline in terms of very severely depressed people. And we've found that it does work very temporarily, but the person will become depressed very quickly after that. So it's kind of one of those really quick solutions when you have somebody who's so severely depressed that they need to be hospitalized, and trying to get them to get back to base, so that when they start to decline again, it's going to be from a better standpoint. Now, some things when it comes to mild deprivation, we know that it doesn't really impact cognitive effort. It doesn't impact exercises that don't require cognitive effort, that just require sort of physical exertion. So like weightlifting, running, swimming, there's not a lot of like plays that you do for that. There's not a lot of cognitive effort when it comes to sort of running through advanced, pre-thought out, pre-memorized plans. So what we do find is subjective account of performance is impacted in those things. So the person feels like they're exerting more effort, and we actually do see that they are exerting their effort is impacted, because we see that their heart rate and respiration are increasing compared to when they're getting enough sleep. In those sports like basketball, tennis, and soccer that require attention and thinking, really rapid changes in coordination, those are affected mostly by mild deprivation. You're not as quick thinking. Your attention might be altered. You're not doing the plays properly. Maybe you're not initiating them in a timely way. Those are the ones that are really affected by mild deprivation. If you're an athlete, it's really, really, really important that you get enough sleep, because you'll be much more likely to memorize and be able to recall where you need to be when, and also it helps you perform better. We do know that there are certain types of sleep that, of course, will affect your muscle. Not necessarily we call it muscle memory, but it affects your implicit memory, so your habitual memory. So if you've learned a new way of doing something, or if you've learned a new technique, if you are deprived of like REM sleep, then you're going to perform that a whole lot worse than if you were to have a full night's rest. I do want to put these statistics up for drowsy driving. There was a recent study that was done that found that, and this is a very recent study, that found that driving drowsy is pretty much the same as driving drunk. and in a sense that your attention and your abilities are severely impacted. And so there's been a lot of education programs that are now up and coming, that are trying to get the message across that as soon as you feel drowsy, as soon as you feel like you're about to, fall asleep, it's really too late. Once you're in the car and you're trying to drive and you're experiencing this, what ends up happening is that there's really not a lot that you can do other than pulling over and getting a nap. A lot of people say, oh, well, if I just turn the radio up really loud, or I get a drink, or I get some caffeine, or I pinch myself, or I roll the windows down, or blast cold air. These actually have been shown not to work. They work maybe for a couple of minutes, but then you're right back to drowsy. Best way to do this is just either to pull over and have somebody else drive, or to actually try to just get a nap in, a quick cat nap, and that will, help hopefully solve your drowsiness. But once you get in the car, if you get in the car and you're nodding off, or you're feeling really drowsy, that's basically the same thing as driving buzzed. And so that can be really problematic. I've included some very interesting disasters here, as well as a video that's on Moodle. I want you to take a look at these, and what you'll notice is that a lot of these disasters occur at that point in the morning where your melatonin release is at peak. So 3 a.m., 4 a.m., things like that. You'll see that a lot of these kind of happen at peak hours, or they're due to deprivation. Here you see 1:23 a.m., and you'll see that those sort of examples are pretty disastrous. I mean, these are a lot of people were killed, a lot of damage was done in some of these very traumatic accidents. So definitely take a look at that. Here I talk about the Pellegrino study, and really what this is about essentially is that we've found that individuals, depending on their genetic makeup, so if they have particular alleles, they actually seem to require less sleep than other people who have different mutations. And not only do they need less sleep, but when they are deprived of sleep, it turns out that they're not as affected. So they may only need 5 or 6 hours of sleep max, and they're good. And then if you deprive them to 3 hours of sleep, they don't feel as affected as somebody who normally needs 8 hours of sleep and they're deprived of 4 hours, sleep. So this is really interesting that it seems like they're in our genes. There's actually explanations for why it is that we may need more or less sleep. So there's a very interesting twin study here, and you should definitely take a look if you have a chance at that particular study. So I'm going to stop the video here just to kind of make sure that we break them up a little bit, and I'm going to continue on talking about sleep deprivation. I'm going to talk about the experiment that was done, a couple of experiments that were done on sleep deprivation that are really kind of neat. So I'm going to, this is sort of part 1, and we'll move into part 2 in the second video.